last tutorial, I showed how to create an HTML file that is going to run using Python and particularly Flask for the backend code. So now I'm going to show how we can take that and put it into a Python program to then use it for a website. So first thing we need to do, right now we're in the index.html that is in the templates folder. So we need to get out of that templates folder and go into our main directory. Otherwise, it's not going to access the HTML files properly. So I'm going to exit my index.html and then go back to my main directory and then create my Python file. So I'm going to call it main.py. And in this particular situation, we need to make sure that we have the right libraries. So for this one, we need Flask. So I'm going to create a new terminal window. You can open terminal straight from Visual Studio Code, or you can do it from terminal on a Mac or command line on a PC. So once I have it open, the terminal's down here. I'm going to type pip3 install Flask. Okay, this is going to install it for me, and if you have Python 2, you would just do pip install Flask. All right, so now I have successfully installed Flask on my Mac. Okay, from here, the next thing I need to do is make sure that I've imported all the libraries that I need. So I'm going to start by saying from Flask import Flask. And I also need two more functions from the Flask directory, which are render template and request. Render template is going to be used since we're using the HTML template, and then request is used because we need to use a form. The next thing that we need to do is create the app. So we have app equals Flask with a capital F, and then we call it name. All right, so whenever we create any sort of website using Flask, we need to use the app.route function to tell us where we want it to go on our website. So for here, I'm going to say app.route and then just slash because I want it to be my main page. Okay, if I wanted it to be, slash blog or have any other pages, we would add that information here. For the main page, we just put a slash, and then we put the methods we want, which are get and post, so that it can be used with forms. Okay. Underneath this, I put the main function that I'm going to use when I'm running this page. So for now, I'm just going to make it a random page. So I'll say print very cool website or something like that. All right, and then from here, actually, let's not print it, let's return it. Sorry about that, so that it shows on the page. All right, now, if I want it to run this right away, whenever I run this app, I need to tell it to do that. So I'm going to add a conditional here and say f name equals main. This just makes sure it's my main program and not another one that's importing the functions. And I tell it to app.run and then host equals 0.0.0.0. So it's going to make your computer the host of this, and those should be periods, not commas. All right, now we're ready to test to make sure that it's properly importing, loading, and running Flask. So let's go ahead and run this. Okay, so it's going to show this in the terminal, and then it creates a development server right here. So this is going to be the URL of the website. So let's go ahead and open that up. And then you can see here that it shows what I told it to say, which was very cool website. All right. Now, if I wanted to show the template that I had on the last page, then I would have to tell it to render that template. So now I'm going to modify this a little bit. So let's go ahead and minus this. And instead of telling it to return very cool website, I'm going to tell it to return render template and then index.html, because that is what I named my template. Okay. All right, so now I'm going to go down here, press Control C to quit, and then run this program again. So Control C exits the development server and lets me run a new one. So let me run it again. And then now when I go back to that same URL, let's open it up. Refresh the page, and now it shows that website that I had before. Now it still doesn't do anything yet. It actually just brings you back to this form because we haven't done anything or told it to actually do this math yet. All right, so now I'm going to work on writing the code to make it do something, okay? So for now, it's only loading the index.html. We are going to need to create a second HTML for the other part of the program, which is where the results go. So let's go ahead and go back into our templates folder. And from here, I'm going to create another HTML file for the calculation. So here, let's create that. So I'm going to call this calculation.html. Okay, and what this will do is have it go somewhere else if it does a calculation. Okay, so I'm going to start it the same way I did the last one. Creating an HTML, creating a head, and then I'm going to create a title. And I'm going to now put placeholders in this title because I wanted to actually use information for my Python code. So for placeholders, when we're using Flask, we put it in curly brackets like this, double curly brackets. So calc, because I'm going to use whatever calculation they chose, of, and then number 1 and number 2. So right now, those are placeholders. We're not going to see them in the code quite yet. All right, so done with my head. Now I'm going to create the body. Okay, and then it's going to say the result is, and then whatever result we got. And suppose I wanted to be able to go to the main page, I can say, create a link to go back to the main page and just say, click here to calculate again. Okay, and that's going to make it go back to the main page. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go down here, Control C to quit. Let's run this so I can see what it looks like. And right now, it doesn't have anything because I haven't told it what to put in for calc number 1 and number 2. So when you have a Flask website, it has a little bit of a weird look to it because we haven't filled in these missing places. Okay. And then here doesn't quite work yet either, but it will once we have done the rest of that stuff. Okay, so now that we've done that, we're going to go back to the main.py file and actually start doing the programming so it shows the calculation. Okay, so I'm going to create in the beginning of my code a function that could do the calculation. So before app.route, I'm going to create my calculation function. And this is going to do what I wanted in my calculation from my index. So it had 4 options: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And I wanted to do that with number 1 and number 2. So let's go into this and create a do calculation function. Okay. And then I wanted to be able to use whatever function I want, and then the 2 numbers. Okay, and then I'm going to let it choose which function I have. So the first one is to say if funct equals addition. Then I want it to return whatever number 1 plus number 2 is. Okay, and then elif funct equals subtraction. Then I return number 1 minus number 2. Then I check to see if it's multiplication. And then finally, I check to see if it's for division. And I'm not going to use an else in case they type it in wrong. So I don't want to have it work if they type in the wrong thing or don't select anything. So let's do division and then say return number 1 divided by number 2. Now, when we're doing division, I definitely know that there's some numbers that go on forever. So if it's not a terminating decimal, I do want it to round. So I'm going to add a function here to round when I have division and do round number 1 divided by number 2 and round to 3 decimal places. I think is good, but you can use whatever you would like. Okay, once we have done this, then we're going to use that in our do calculation function. So I'm gonna scroll down a little bit because we've created this. Now we need to use it down here. Okay. So first thing I want to do is create a spot for errors. Okay. I didn't have this in my initial form, but I could have a situation where stuff isn't typed in properly and I don't want it to continue and throw an error on the next page. So I'm going to create a list of my errors. And then I'm going to now go add things to that errors file and then show it on the page if they make a mistake. All right, so I'm going to go into the HTML part of errors later. For now, we're just going to know how it's going to be used and add to the list as we're working with this form. Okay, so now we have to check to see what the method is. So this is using the request. So if request.method equals post, which is what we're using for this form, then we want it to, I'm going to move this last return statement down because we're not using it right now. Number 1 equals none. So this is the value of number 1 if nothing gets entered. Number 2 equals none. And then calc equals none. And if you remember, this is the same name as what we used in the index.html file. Number 1, number 2, and calc. Okay. They don't need to be the same names, but it makes it a little bit easier if you use the same one. All right, now I'm going to try and see if they entered information properly. So the try and accept will attempt to take number 1 and convert it to a float type, which means it's a number. So request.form allows me to get the value of number 1 from the form. So this is in quotes because it's coming from the form on the index.html page template. Now, if this doesn't work, so I have accept, then I'm going to add an error to the errors list, okay? And I'm going to do this using the dot format so that way it can enter whatever they had from the form. So I have here all right, when I put it into the curly brackets, that means it's going to take something that I tell it to take later on in this function. So is not a number. And then /n to create a new line. Put dot format. So that way I can replace that R with something from the form. So then I say request.form, just like I did before. And then again, I'm requesting number 1 from the form. Okay. So now I'm done with that. It's going to try to convert it to a float. If it doesn't work, then we know that it's not a number. So we keep going. All right, then it's going to try to take number 2. The same exact format. So request.form and then number 2. All right, if it works, it keeps going. If it doesn't work, then it's going to add to the errors list. And again, I'm using the same exact format. I use the curly brackets and the exclamation point for the dot format and add a new line. And then dot format, request.form, and then number 2. Okay, because in this example, we're getting number 2 instead of number 1. Now, the third error could be if they forget to pick a type of calculation. So if they don't pick addition, multiplication, or subtraction, I'm going to try and request from the form. Okay, and if they didn't select anything, this won't work because there's nothing in the calc part of the form. So if it doesn't work, it's going to add to the errors list, no calculation type selected. All right, now we can do the math. So let's say if number 1 is not none. So this makes sure that when I did those try and accepts that I got a result. If I didn't get a result, it's going to skip this condition. So I want to make sure that number 1 is not none, number 2 is not none, and number n calc is not none. If that's the case, that means I can do some math. So I'm going to use result equals do calculation. This is the do calculation function we just created before. The calc that we got based on what they selected, number 1 and number 2. And this is whatever they put into from the form. Once we've done that, we're going to render the template. So return render template, but this time we're using the calculation.html, okay? But you might remember that in the beginning of the calculation.html, we had these placeholders for calc number 1, number 2, and result. So when we render a template and there's information we want to put on the page, we need to actually put that into this render template function. And we can add all of them just by using a comma. So I'm going to say calc on my website or the HTML code is equal to calc from the variable I created in the Python HTML. Then number 1 equals number 1. Number 2 equals number 2. And result equals results. All right. So now let's see how this runs. Run without debugging. Then we're going to go to this website here. And I'm going to re-enter this. And now let's try putting in some numbers. So 3, 5, and let's do subtract. And it does correctly return the result of -2. Okay, click here to calculate again. Let's do 7 divided by 9. Okay, and then see what happens if I don't select anything. So if I don't select anything, it comes back to this page. And then if I say hello, 3, divide, it doesn't work. It comes back to this page. Now, while this is all well and good, it doesn't really give us any feedback yet. We programmed the feedback into a list, but it's not showing it on this page. So what we want to do is make it show it on that page, and we're going to do it a similar way to what we did for the result that we show on the calculation page. Let's close this development server and then go back to our index.html file so we can add a place for us to put those errors. Okay, So in the beginning of the form, so it can be anywhere, I'm going to, right before we ask for numbers, show those errors, okay? So since the errors are in a list, I wanted to show each item in the list, and suppose I wanted to show it on a new line. So when we want to do a for loop, I can do that by using this % symbol. So I would say for error in errors, and this is using Jinja to kind of put some Python code right into it. So for error and errors, so that's going to take each item in the list. And I don't know why it's deleting that. Put it back. And then I want it to put one each in its own paragraph. So adding those little double brackets here for the error that I want it to show. And then I use the % sign to end this little bit of script. So end for, and that's ending that for loop right here. Okay. And errors is the variable that we get from the Python code. So we need to make sure that we add that in the render template. So just like here, we had to do calc equals calc, number one equals number one. We have to do the same thing for our errors list. So after index.html, I'm going to say errors equals errors. All right, now let's go ahead and test this out again. All right, and let's refresh this. It's the same numbers here, just different site. So let's see what happens if I set hello and 5 and multiply. Okay, and it gives me this error here saying hello is not a number. Okay, if I hit divide and nothing else, it's not a number. Or if I just don't enter anything, it also says no calculation type selected. Now let's make sure the other parts are still working. And it looks like it is. It's still working normally for everything else. All right, so that's all for this tutorial. In the next one, I will show how we can add CSS code to our website to make it look a little bit nicer and give it a design. So stay tuned for that one, which will be uploaded soon.